Good afternoon, everyone. I think this is hopefully working. I can see lots of people are trickling in, so we'll get started on the Food for Thought seminar now. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Food for Thought seminar. My name's Sophie Watson, and I'm part of the Food for Thought team. Before I introduce you to the speakers for today, I'd just like to remind you of some housekeeping information. As this is a Microsoft webinar event, you can't unmute yourself or come on camera, and the chat function is also disabled. We do, however, welcome any questions or comments that you may have, and you can post these into the Q&A chat box, which should appear at the right-hand side of your screen. Please note that any questions will be picked up at the end of the presentation, but please do feel free to ask questions throughout using the Q&A box as we go along, and then we can come to them at the end. Today's seminar is being recorded, so the seminar recording will be uploaded to our Food for Thought YouTube channel shortly and circulated in due course. We're also always looking for recommendations of speakers to invite to Food for Thought, so if you have any suggestions, then please let us know at our email address, which is foodforthought@food.gov.uk. So for today's seminar, I'd like to provide a very warm welcome to our speakers for today. We have Tom Turner, who is a Senior Social Science Research Officer here at the Food Standards Agency. He joined the FSA in October 2023, and he leads on the Consumer Insights Tracker. He has a range of research and operational experience both inside and outside of government, and since joining the civil service in 2020, has delivered a variety of large-scale quantitative and qualitative research projects across a range of topics whilst at the FSA and Ofsted. Connor Cotton is a research manager in the YouGov public sector team. He has a wide range of experience managing large-scale quantitative research projects on public health and food safety related topics. He's currently the project manager for the FSA Consumer Insights Tracker survey, including the latest end-of-year Consumer Insights report, which is now published and covers data from July 2023 to March 2024. And finally, we have Becky Wood joining, who also works at the FSA as a Social Science Research Officer. Becky joined the FSA in September 2023 and works on the tracker. She's also previously worked as a researcher in the civil service since 2021, working across a range of projects. So with that, I'll hand over now to our speakers to present on the Consumer Insights Tracker, trends and insights. And from all of us at the Food for Thought team, hope you enjoy the presentation today. So over to you, Tom. I think you'll be kicking us off and sharing your slides.
Yes, thanks very much, Sophie. Hopefully everyone can see the slides. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along today. My name is Tom Turner. I'm a Senior Social Science Research Officer at the FSA. And as Sophie mentioned, I'm joined by Becky Wood and Connor Cotton. And today we're going to be talking all things Consumer Insights Tracker. So this is what the outline of the presentation looks like. So we'll start by giving an overview of what the Consumer Insights Tracker is. Where did it come from? How do we use it? We'll then take a deeper look at the methodology. So how's the survey conducted? What kind of things do we ask about? We'll then turn our attention to looking at some of the findings from a report that we recently published, which looks in depth at the period July 2023 to March 2024. And then we'll finish off with a few conclusions and leave some time at the end for questions. I will hand over to Becky, who will give us an overview of the Consumer Insights Tracker.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I'll briefly talk through what the Consumer Insight Tracker is, including the purpose, the history, and some of the ways that the data from the tracker is used. So the Consumer Insights Tracker is the FSA's monthly online survey, which is conducted with consumers aged 16 plus living in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the tracker monitors changes in consumers' behaviour and attitudes in relation to food. And some of the core topics that we cover include food affordability, food availability, consumer concerns, and trust and confidence in the food supply chain and FSA. So the purpose of the tracker is to monitor trends on consumer behaviour and attitudes in relation to food on a monthly basis. We're able to provide publicly available insights on the topics that we cover in the survey because we publish a report plus our data every quarter. We're also able to add ad hoc questions into the tracker to enable us to gather data quickly on emerging or topical issues because of the fast monthly turnaround of the tracker. And we can also use the tracker as a way to identify areas for future research and to test questions for Food and U2, which is another FSA survey that runs less frequently with a larger sample and is focused on consumers' attitudes and behaviours in areas of strategic interest to the FSA. So then just briefly in terms of the history of the tracker, it started in 2020 and was called the COVID-19 Consumer Tracker, which tracked behaviour and attitudes towards food purchasing and consumption during the pandemic. Then in November 2021, the survey was renamed as the Consumer Insights Tracker, which was established to monitor consumer behaviours and attitudes in relation to food. And then in 2023, the FSA's Advisory Committee for Social Science completed a review of the tracker. And as a result, we made some improvements and methodological changes to the survey, and it was relaunched in July 2023 with YouGov as the new supplier. And these changes mean that the data pre and post July 23 are not comparable. So that's why we'll be looking at the data from July 23 to March 24 in this presentation. So then some of the ways that we use the tracker data internally include internal briefings, informing risk assessments and comms campaigns, and we also use the data in presentations and reports. And the data is also used externally across government. We've had interest in the data from academics and third sector organisations as well. And the tracker data has also been used in media coverage. So that's kind of a brief overview of what the Consumer Insights Tracker is. And now I'll hand over to Connor, who's going to discuss some of the methodology of the tracker next.
Hi everyone, my name is Connor. I am a research manager on the public sector team at YouGov. YouGov have been conducting the Consumer Insights Tracker on behalf of the FSA since July of last year. So we've been running a survey on a monthly basis since then, as well as producing reports on a monthly and a quarterly basis, as well as the most recent edition of kind of the long form annual report that was written in kind of March, April time. So as I mentioned, I am going to talk a little bit about kind of the methodology behind how we conduct the survey, how we achieve a representative sample of our target audience, just so you have some context before we kind of get into the discussion of the results. So the Consumer Insights Tracker is run via an online survey approach. So we administer the survey each month to members of our YouGov UK panel. So you can see on the right there an example of the invitation that we send out to people each month for the survey. So it says very simply, you've been selected for a YouGov survey. It'll go into their email and they can click on Start Survey. We don't give them any context as to what the survey is about, the topics, etc., because we don't want to bias who is likely to engage with it with this specific survey. We don't want people, for example, who are very interested in food-related issues specifically be more likely to take the survey, because that could have a kind of a biasing impact on our samples. So we are very kind of neutral in terms of who we actually invite to the survey and how we invite them. As I mentioned, we recruit all respondents from our panel, and that is made up of more than 400,000 active panel members living in the UK. So we maintain a panel of engaged respondents who have specifically opted in to take part in online research activities. Most importantly, that includes specifically recruiting kind of hard to reach audiences. So those would be people who are less likely to sign up to an online survey panel, and even if they do sign up, less likely to actually take surveys as part of that. So that might include younger people, or those from ethnic minority backgrounds, or those from certain social grades. So we put specific efforts on recruiting people from those groups onto our panel in order to ensure that we can achieve kind of representative samples for all of our surveys, including the Consumer Insights Tracker. Each month, we design the questionnaire in a collaborative process between the FSA project team and the YouGov project team. So the survey kind of asks respondents about a range of issues relating to their attitudes and behaviours, about food-related topics that are of strategic interest to the FSA. So the bulk of the questionnaire generally remains the same each month. So it's made up of core questions that we want to kind of track over time, relating to kind of food affordability, attitudes towards food availability, concerns, etc. So we're able to kind of track those key matrices over time and look at, have they changed from month to month or over kind of a longer period, so we can kind of track those core metrics. But we also kind of have a bit of flexibility in terms of how we design the questionnaire. So we do leave space to swap in and out topical questions as kind of new emerging issues or issues of interest arise, or food topics that might be in the media, things like that. So we can ask those on an ad hoc kind of monthly basis as well. Fieldwork takes place on, again, as I said, a monthly basis. Typically takes place during the first week of the month and lasts around 5 days in total. I'll talk a little bit more about the sample for the survey on the next slide, but the sample is made up of around 2,000 adults aged 16 plus living in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Before fieldwork takes place each month, we do run a smaller pilot survey, and what that survey enables us to do is to kind of test the survey is functioning properly, to test, how is the routing working in the survey, are people moving through the survey as they should, or if we have any new kind of topical questions, are people understanding those? Do we need to make any changes to wording? And generally just ensuring that the survey is functioning properly before we go into the main stage of fieldwork. Just the next slide. Yeah. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the sampling approach that we use for the survey. So that's essentially how do we choose who takes the survey and how do we recruit them to take the survey. So the sampling approach that we use for the Consumer Insights Tracker and also something that we use across almost all of our surveys is quota sampling. And we take the quotas that we use for our sample from the 2021 UK census. So quota sampling is a non-probability sampling method, and it involves dividing the population up into subgroups, and then the relative proportion of each of those subgroups as a percentage of the total sample is based on known characteristics of the overall population that we get from the census. So to put that in a little bit more simple terms, essentially we pick out key matrices from the population. So specifically, we pick out age, gender, social grade, region, and education level. And those are our kind of key sampling characteristics. And within those characteristics, we split them up into subgroups. So age is split up into 5 different age brackets. So we got 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, etc. Gender is split up into male and female. Social grade has 5 letter grades. So we split that up. That's kind of a proxy for or a measure of socioeconomic status. We split up region into England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And we also have a measure for education level that kind of assigns people based on what their highest level of education they've attained is. So we split those up into kind of subgroups, and we determine what proportion of the population aged 16 plus in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, for example, is aged 18 to 24, 25 to 34, etc. And we assign a percentage proportion to each of those. What percentage is male, what percentage is female, etc., for all of our quotas. And then once we begin fieldwork, we start filling up those quotas until we've achieved the right proportion of the population that makes up each of those subgroups. So for example, once we achieve, say the roughly 15% of the population aged 25 to 34, we'll stop sampling from that group and we'll continue on with fieldwork just with the other age groups. And once we've filled up all of our quotas, that will be when we'll close fieldwork. And what that all enables us to do is ensure that the sample is representative or as representative as possible of the sample of the population age 16 plus in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. In terms of sample size, obviously, as I mentioned, it's roughly 2,000 per wave. We usually recruit slightly more than that just to be on the safe side. But the reason why we chose a sample of 2,000, there's a few of them. Firstly, it enables us to have a margin of error that is relatively small, roughly 2%. Now that can vary slightly by kind of, by ranging from kind of 1.8 to 2.2, depending on the specific result we're looking at within the survey. But on average, we get a margin of error of around 2%. And what that enables us to do is we're quite confident in terms of looking at statistically significant changes over time between the survey. So, if we see a certain result for a given metric in April, and we see that change by kind of more than 2% in May, we can be fairly confident that that, is a statistically significant change generally. A sample of 2,000 also enables us to do analysis across demographic groups. So, for example, we will have roughly 1,000 men, roughly 1,000 women, because that's kind of how the gender split is essentially 50-50. And what that that kind of demographic sample of 1,000 each again enables us to do quite robust analysis across that group. Similarly for age, we divide age up into 3 when we're analyzing it with under 35s, 35 to 54, and 55 plus, and we can kind of have roughly kind of 600, 700 each, which again is quite robust for the analysis that we want to do. Finally, on this, we also, of course, weight the data at the end of the data processing stage. So once we process and clean the data, we apply weights to it, and we use the same matrices that we use for the quotas from the 2021 UK census. So weighting essentially adjusts the contribution of individual respondents and ensures that they're given the correct relative influence, again, based on the demographics of that target population that we have. So when we set our quotas and when we run fieldwork, we'll usually be, marginally off among certain groups. We might collect slightly more women than we had intended to, or we might collect slightly fewer, under 35s, for example. And what we can do then was we can weight the data and make marginal adjustments so that it's as close as possible to that target population that we need. We do find each month that the weighting efficiency is kind of higher than 95%. And what that indicates to us is that the weights are really not having to do much work to adjust our sample. We're not manipulating our sample very much with weights. And that indicates that our quotas have done quite well in getting a sample that's representative of our target population. And we can be quite confident in kind of the inferences we're making about the population as a whole as a result. So obviously, given that we are running this survey online, obviously there are alternative methods that we could run a survey with. We could, for example, run it via face-to-face, where interviewers, go out, for example, to people's homes and interview them directly, or we could do it via what's called a caddy methodology. So it's via the telephone, where we could give people, random telephone numbers, and they would call people and administer the survey over the phone. But obviously there are kind of strengths and limitations to any of those approaches. So we thought it might be interesting just to have a quick run through kind of a quick discussion of what the strengths of an online approach are and what some of the limitations might be. So first of all, starting off with the strengths, firstly, it enables us to achieve reliable and representative tracking over time. So because our panel is so large, particularly for those kind of hard to reach subgroups, it enables us to kind of turn around the survey quite quickly on a month-to-month basis, and also kind of achieve representative data over time among those key subgroups. The speed of delivery, as I mentioned, so online data collection can take place at any time of day. Once somebody's received the invite to the survey, they can take it at any time that they want. That obviously isn't the case with a telephone methodology or with a face-to-face methodology, which is obviously restricted in terms of when you can do data collection. Similarly, we can also pre-screen respondents to determine that they are eligible to take the survey before they actually are kind of brought into it, which isn't necessarily the case with telephone or face-to-face. You have to determine, for example, when you call someone, is this a demographic that I need, or have I already filled my quotas? And that obviously speeds it up for online data collection slightly. Online data collection can also reduce certain forms of bias. So, for example, we ask questions in the survey about concerns about ability to afford food in the next month, or whether they've used a food bank or emergency food parcel. And those are questions, obviously, that people may not feel comfortable answering truthfully. But it has been found that online methods, kind of the sense of anonymity you get, does lead people to be maybe less affected by those kind of social desirability biases and give kind of more truthful answers. It also helps to reduce certain forms of location-based bias. So, for example, if a face-to-face interviewer is conducting interviews, they may have a tendency to kind of focus on one particular area to collect all of their responses, because it's easier and more efficient. But obviously, with online, we don't introduce that kind of bias. Essentially anybody who signs up to the panel, no matter where they live, has kind of the same opportunity to take part in a survey such as this. We also have quite a bit of flexibility in how we design the survey, not only just in terms of the topical questions we can bring in and out, but also in kind of the media that we can include. So things like images, video, or audio type questions can be included. And again, that might not be possible or as possible in a face-to-face or telephone setting. In terms of the limitations, first of all, online panels there is the risk that you can have a kind of a level of opt-in sampling bias. So what that means is that our panelists do tend to be more engaged on issues, kind of civic and social issues, tend to be more knowledgeable about things like politics. So that is something that we do need to be wary about when sampling for our surveys. We can introduce quotas to ensure that we are getting a representative sample of the population, but that is one kind of risk or limitation that we might see with online survey research. Similarly to that representation, as I said, some groups may be underrepresented in online opt-in panels. So first of all, those who don't have access to the internet, now that is a smaller and smaller percentage in the UK each year. I think it's less than 2% now don't have access to the internet. But obviously those people by definition cannot take part in an online panel. But I think more importantly would be those kind of hard to reach groups. So we always find that the hardest groups for us to fill up our quotas in are younger men, those from ethnic minority backgrounds, those from the C2DE social grades. We do find that we always kind of struggle slightly more to fill up our quotas with those respondents. So ensuring again representation among those groups and focusing our recruitment efforts for the panel are kind of key to mitigating that. And then finally, in terms of our demographic analysis, the sample size is 2,000, which means that we can analyze across demographics for most groups, but certain groups we may have kind of quite small sample sizes among subgroups. So for example, across regions, we generally collect a sample size of around 100 in both Northern Ireland and Wales each month. And obviously England is by far the kind of the largest given the relative size of the population. But obviously that does lead to, when you're analyzing by region, relatively high kind of margins of error. So what we can do is we can combine multiple months of data if we want to do regional analysis, which is something that we've done within this year's annual report. And then finally, just to give you some context on the specific issues that we ask about in the survey before we kind of talk about the results. So these are kind of the core issues that are focused on within the surveys. First of all, we do look at a lot of things about food affordability, which has obviously been quite an important topic recently, given food price inflation over the last year and kind of beyond that previously. So we ask questions about whether people are worried about their household's ability to afford food in the next month, whether they've used a food bank, and the actions they've taken as a result of food affordability worries. So have they eaten food past its use by date, for example, in order to try to save money? And we can track whether those are changing over time, how kind of food prices and food affordability are impacting those things. We also ask about worries about food availability, so kind of similar to food affordability, but are they worried about there being enough food available for their household in the next month? We track a number of food concerns about the food system in the UK, so things like food prices, ultra-processed foods, and food poverty and inequality have consistently ranked kind of in the top 3, top 5 nearly every single month we've run the survey. So those are really kind of among the top issues that people are thinking about. And we ask some questions about the food supply chain and the Food Standards Agency itself. So kind of confidence in food supply chain, trust in the FSA to do its job, and then kind of trust and confidence in a number of kind of the functions of both of the FSA and kind of the different entities involved in the food supply chain. So that's just a quick intro into the core topics we look at. And now Tom is going to start with the first section on the kind of results we got from this year's survey.
So thanks very much, Connor. So yes, for the rest of the session today, we'll be focusing on the end of year report that we published in July, which looks at the period July 2023 to March 2024. As mentioned earlier, the reason why it starts in July is because we started a new time series in July with YouGov due to those methodological differences between the new and old supply. Before we jump into the findings, it's just important to consider kind of some of the relevant context that was going on during the tracking period. So here we have just a selection of headlines from July 2023 to March 2024, mainly around the ongoing cost of living crisis, which was one of the main things that was ongoing during the period. So we've got headlines here around energy bills, the cost of food, inflation, and just thinking about food price inflation and kind of what this was doing over the tracking period. So it was trending downwards. In July of 2023, it was at 14.9%, and this was down to 4% in March 2024. We also see a similar kind of thing for consumer price inflation, but worth noting, even though we do see those rates over the tracking period trending downwards, we've obviously seen those large rises in the last couple of years, and for most of the tracking period, rates of inflation were well above historical averages. So with that in mind, first area to look at is around consumer concerns. So in the tracker, we prompt people with a list of food-related issues, and we ask them to say how concerned, if at all, they are about each. And here are the list of those 14 food-related issues, and next to each is the percentage that said that they were either highly or somewhat concerned about that issue in March 2024. And as we can see here, the issue that the highest number of consumers were concerned about is perhaps unsurprisingly food prices at 87%. This was then followed by ultra-processed or over-processing of food at 77%, then food poverty and inequality 75%. How does that look over time? So on this slide here are the kind of top 5 topics or issues that the largest number of consumers were concerned about, plotted over time. So for food prices, which is the green line along the top, we can see it's 86% concerned about this in July of last year, and we know 87% were concerned about this in March. So kind of what we can see generally looking over time is that the levels of concern about these issues has remained relatively stable since tracking began either in July or August. Don't tend to see a lot of variation month to month. Food prices has consistently been the topic that most consumers are concerned about, followed by food poverty and inequality, or ultra-processed or over-processing of food, depending on the month. So what do we see in terms of demographic differences for kind of those top 3 topics? So for food prices, concern was high across the board. We typically see over 80% concerned in each of kind of the demographic groups that we look at. We do see some demographic differences, for example, by income, but in general, these tend to be quite minimal. So if we do look at income, for example, as you might expect, slightly more of those in the lower to middle incomes reported concern. So 90% of those with a household income of under 20,000 and 93% of those with a household income of 20 to 35,000. Slightly more in those groups reported concern compared to those with a household income of over 60,000, of which 82% reported concern. Still worth noting that over 80% of that group were concerned about that particular issue. Thinking about food poverty and inequality, again, concern was fairly high across the board. In terms of age, we do see some differences. So we see more of those in the younger or middle to age brackets reporting concern compared to those aged 55 and over. And then we do see some differences by level of education. So we see more of those with a degree, master's or PhD, saying that they're concerned when compared to those with no formal qualifications. Then in terms of ultra-processed or over-processing of food, again, we see concern about this issues high across the board. We do see some differences by age. The story is slightly different in terms of age to what we see for food poverty and inequality. So for ultra-processed or the over-processing of food, we see more concern in the older age groups and middle age groups when compared to those in the younger age groups. We also see some small differences by social grade. So we tend to see more concern among those in A, B, and C1 social grades. So that's those in higher and intermediate managerial, admin, and professional type occupations. That's compared to C2 and DE, which include things like skilled manual occupations, semi-skilled and unskilled manual occupations, and also those who are unemployed. So the next set of questions and module that we have in the tracker is around food affordability. So how many consumers say they're worried about affording food, use of food banks, and actions to try and save money. So in addition to being asked how concerned they are about the range of food-related issues that we've just looked at, including food prices, respondents are also asked about their level of worry about being able to afford food for themselves or their household in the next month. And this graph shows us the proportion that said they were worried about this each month. We can see that's 22% in March of this year. And looking at this over time, we can see that it's declined gradually across the tracking period, obviously falling from 28% in July of last year, down to 22% in February 2024, of which it stayed at the same level in March. But worth noting, although we have seen a slight decline, still just over 1 in 5 said that they were worried about being able to afford food in the next month in March of this year. Turning our attention to some demographic differences on this. So we do see some differences in terms of who said that they were more worried about being able to afford food in the next month. So on this slide, there's a series of graphs showing the proportion worried about being able to afford food in the next month among different groups. And for each group, the dark green bar is the percentage worried in July 2023, and the light green bar is the percentage worried in March 2024. And what we see is that in general, so the groups that are most likely to report being worried about household food affordability in terms of age includes those aged under 55, so those aged 16 to 34 or 35 to 54. It also includes those who said that they are limited by a disability or a long-term health condition compared to those who said they are not. You also see that those from an ethnic minority background are more likely to be worried about this compared to white respondents. And also those with a child aged under 18 in the household are more likely to be worried, as are those in the most deprived areas. We can also see here that levels of worry have declined between July and March for almost all of these groups. So, for example, if we take age and look at those aged 16 to 34, 33% were worried about being able to afford food in July of last year, dropping down to 24% in March of this year. The only real exception here is among those who are limited by a health condition or disability. So 36% were worried in July of last year and 34% in March of this year. So that's remained broadly unchanged, and at 34% remains higher than the other groups. So we're just going to pause for a little quiz. I won't be able to see your answers, unfortunately, but I thought it could be a bit of a personal challenge. You perhaps note down your answers. There will be a part 2 to this coming up, so there's a maximum of 4 marks on offer over the whole presentation. So in the tracker, we ask about a number of different things that people are doing to try and save money. And some of these are actions taken by people to save money when shopping. So the question is, which of these 4 statements here, or 4 behaviours, was the most common ways that consumers said that they were trying to save money when shopping? So was it shopping around in multiple supermarkets or shops, choosing cheaper alternatives rather than branded products, buying reduced or discounted food close to its use-by date, or buying less fresh food and more long-life foods instead? Which of those was most common? I'll give you a few moments just to have a think and perhaps note it down. So hopefully you're ready for the answer. So it was choosing cheaper alternatives rather than branded products. That was what the highest proportion of consumers reported. And as a quick follow-up question, what percentage of consumers said this applied to them or someone in their household in March 2024? So we're looking for a percentage here. that said that they'd chosen cheaper alternatives rather than branded products in the last month. So hopefully you've all had a guess, and I'll reveal the answers. So it was 47%. So 47% said they or someone in their household had chosen cheaper alternatives rather than branded products in March 2024. Interested to know if this is kind of higher or lower than you expected, or potentially if anybody managed to get it bang on. So what we see here is those 4 shopping behaviours plotted over time. And in March 2024, we can see, and as we know, the most common ways of saving money when food shopping were choosing cheaper alternatives rather than branded products, 47%. 37% said they bought reduced or discounted food close to its use-by date to save money. 34% had shopped around in multiple shops to save money. 17% said they'd bought less fresh food and more long-life foods instead. And in terms of looking at this over time, so we saw some slight increases in a couple of these between August and September of last year, but in general, things have remained pretty stable since then. Perhaps a slight gradual decline in the proportion saying that they'd bought less fresh food and more long-life foods instead. This has dropped from 22% in August 2023 to 17% in March of this year. And just thinking about these 4 behaviours together, so 65%, almost 2/3 of consumers said that they'd done at least one of these in the last month. We also ask about a range of other behaviours in the tracker. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'd encourage you to take a look at the full report if it's something that you're interested in. Some of the things that we do ask about are more risky food safety behaviours that people might be doing to save money. And here we can see those 5 things that we ask about. For each of these individually, incidence is quite low compared to some of the other behaviours we ask about. So for example, when it comes to lowering the cooking temperature of food to save money, 11% of respondents said that they'd done this in the last month. Similar proportions said that they'd reduced the length of time that food is cooked for. 9% said they'd eaten food past its use-by date because they couldn't afford to buy more food. And then there's a couple of statements around behaviours to do with fridges and freezers. So 9% said they'd changed the settings on their fridge or freezer so that food is being kept at a warmer temperature. And 5% said they turned off a fridge or freezer that contains food to try and save money. And just thinking about these 5 behaviours together, so we see in March of 2024 that 1 in 4 of those in England, Wales and Northern Ireland said that they'd done at least one of these in the last month. And looking at this over time, we can see that there's not been much change. So the graph here shows us the proportion that are reporting at least one of these more risky behaviours each month from August to March. And it's been hovering at around 1 in 4 or just over. We do see some demographic differences in terms of who's more likely to report doing at least one of these. And in some cases, the differences are quite large. So in particular, we see that those who are worried about being able to afford food much more likely to report doing at least one of these. So 58%, nearly 6 in 10 of that group said that they'd done at least one of these behaviours in the last month. We also see that those from ethnic minority backgrounds are more likely to report doing one of these, 39%. Those limited by health condition or disability, those in the most deprived areas, and those aged under 35. So this does paint quite a clear picture, I think, and show us that, in some cases, quite sizable numbers are resorting to at least some unsafe food-related behaviours in order to save money. We also ask about food bank use in the tracker. So specifically, we ask if the respondent or anyone in their households received a free parcel of food from a food bank or other emergency food provider in the last month. And in March 2024, 3% said this applied to them. And this has remained relatively stable over the tracking period, ranging from either 2% or 4% a month. We do see some small demographic differences. I won't go through them all here. One thing to note is that the kind of low level of use of food banks makes it a little more trickier to detect differences that are significant. So these particular findings are based on the first 3 months of 2024 combined, so January, February, and March. So the next thing to touch on is around food availability. So we ask a question about whether respondents are worried about there being enough food available for them or their household in the next month. And we see that the proportion who said that they were worried, so either very or somewhat worried, about there being enough food available for them or their household was at 1 in 5, so 20% in March 2024. Over time, this has been generally stable across the tracking period, although it has declined slightly from 24% in July 2023. Again, we do see some demographic differences in terms of groups that were more worried about there being food available for their household in the next month. So in terms of looking at age, we see that those in the younger and middle age brackets were more likely to be worried, with 23% of those aged 16 to 34 and 25% of those aged 35 to 54 reporting worry, compared to 12% of those aged 55 and over. In terms of household income, we see that those with a household income of 20,000 and under were more likely to report worry. 33% of that group said that they were worried, compared to 12% of those with a household income of 60,000 and over. And also those from an ethnic minority background at 30% were more likely to be worried than white respondents. And then finally, those who said that they were limited a lot by a health condition or disability, they were much more likely at 42% to be worried than those who said that they were not limited by a health condition or disability, of which 16% reported worry in March. So the next and final set of questions we just wanted to touch on were around trust and confidence, both in the food supply chain and the FSA. So we ask about overall confidence in the food supply chain in the tracker. And what we can see here is the percentage that said that they were confident in the food supply chain. So that's the green or top line. And the percentage who said that they were not confident in the food supply chain, that's the purple or bottom line plotted over time. And what we can see is the overall confidence in the food supply chain has increased gradually from 55% in July to 60% in March. And over the same period, we've seen the proportion not confident drop slightly from 30 to 26%. But again, the percentage point differences here are quite small. And for much of the tracking period, we see that things have been relatively stable. Again, we do have demographic differences on this that are explored in the report. I won't dive into them into depth here at risk of sounding a bit repetitive, but for anyone who is interested in this in particular, please do go and check out the full report. Then, as promised, it's time for part 2 of the quiz to check who's listening and still with me. So we also ask in the tracker about how confident consumers are that those involved in the food supply chain in the UK ensure 4 different things. So those 4 different things are the statements that you can see here. So we ask how confident consumers are that those involved in the food supply chain, 1, ensure that there's enough food available for people to eat, so around food availability. 2, ensure that food is safe to eat, so food safety. 3, ensure that there are affordable food options for everyone, so around affordability. And then 4, ensure that food is of a high quality. So the question this time is, which of those 4 were most consumers confident in, which had the highest level of confidence? I'll give you a few moments just to pick one of those 4 before I reveal the answer. So hopefully everyone's ready. So the answer was ensure that food is safe to eat. So most consumers, obviously the highest level of confidence when consumers are asked whether those involved in the food supply chain ensure that food is safe to eat. And as a bonus question, what percentage of consumers were confident that those involved in the food supply chain ensure that food is safe to eat in March 2024? So again, looking for a percentage figure. Give you a couple of moments just to have a guess. So the answer is 73%. Again, would be very impressed if anyone got this right, and very impressed if anyone's got full marks across both parts of the quiz. So let's take a look at those 4 statements in a bit more detail. So what we can see here is the percentage of respondents who said that they were confident in each of those 4 things, plotted over time. And what we can see here is that confidence is consistently lowest when thinking about whether those involved in the food supply chain in the UK ensures that there are affordable food options for everyone. So that's the green line at the bottom, and 39% said they were confident about this in March of this year. And then confidence is consistently highest when we ask consumers whether they're confident that those involved in the food supply chain ensure that food is safe to eat, as we know, and that's the orange line at the top. So quite a big difference between the two that's been consistent over time. The other statements around availability and quality are around the same level of each other and have consistently kind of been midway between the other two statements in terms of levels of confidence. So thinking kind of back to the start of the findings when we were looking at consumer concerns. So on this slide, we've got those 14 food-related issues that we ask how concerned consumers are about. But this time, next to each, we've got the percentage who said that they were concerned about each issue. One among those who were confident in the food supply chain, so that's the green or top bars for each. And then among those who were not confident in the food supply chain, so that's the purple or bottom bar for each. And what we can see is that those who report confidence in the food supply chain are less likely to be concerned about all the food-related issues that we ask about. So, for example, if we just take the bottom issue there, the safety of food produced in the UK, so we see that 35% of those who were confident in the food supply chain were concerned about this, compared to 63% who were not confident. And this pattern is consistent across the issues that we ask about, with differences for some topics greater than others. And then finally, just a couple of slides around the FSA. We do ask quite a few questions on this. I'm not going to delve into lots of detail in the interest of time, but again, it's in the report if it's something you're interested in. But in terms of awareness in the FSA, so in March of this year, we see that just over half, so 55%, said that they had at least some knowledge of the FSA and what it does. And that was made up of 51% of people who said that they knew a little about the FSA and what it does, and 4% of people who said that they knew a lot about the FSA and what it does. An additional 34% said that they'd heard of the FSA, but they don't know anything about it. And then that leaves 12% who said that they either hadn't previously heard of the FSA until they were contacted to take part in the survey, or that they'd never heard of the FSA. And then in terms of trust in the FSA, won't delve into detail, but we look at this among those who said that they've got at least some knowledge of the FSA. And in general, what we find is the majority of that group say that they trust the FSA, and that's been relatively stable over time, with some small variations month to month. Again, if that's something you're interested in, I point you towards the full report. But one thing I did just want to highlight before we wrap up. So this graph probably looks quite familiar, and it's very similar to what we saw when we were looking at the food supply chain. And essentially what we see here is a very similar pattern in that those who trust the FSA were less likely to report concern about the food-related issues that we ask about, compared to those who distrust the FSA. Again, if we just look at the bottom one, the safety of food produced in the UK, 36% of those who trust the FSA reported concern compared to 69% who distrusted the FSA. So that brings us to the end of the different modules we have in the tracker, and just a few very quick reflections from me. So we do see quite a lot of stability across lots of the measures. There's not really been any huge changes. So it kind of suggests that things are staying as they are from the perspective of consumers in relation to the things that we're asking about. One key thread is that the cost of buying food continues to be a top concern for consumers. So food prices, consistently the top concern each month. We also see that food poverty and inequality was either the second or third highest concern in each wave of the tracker too. We do see that consumers are making changes to how they shop for, prepare and store food in order to save money. And then in relation to food safety, we do see that some are resorting to unsafe, riskier food behaviours in order to save money. And the numbers that report doing these kind of things are higher among certain groups. So to find out more, the best place to go is the Consumer Insights Tracker website, where you can find the report that we've been discussing today, along with the accompanying technical report, if you'd like more detail on that. And you'll also find all of our recently published, all of our findings, including our recently published data for April and June 2024. We're also doing a podcast with the Food Foundation later this month, so keep an eye out for that on your podcast feeds. And then also make sure to check out Food and You Too. Best place for that is the Food and You Too website. But we've also done a food for thought on Food and You Too as well. So Food and You Too's our official statistics survey. And as Becky mentioned, it covers a wider range of topics in more depth. We've also got a longer time series for Food and You Too. So you can see how things change over time, especially in our trends reports. So that's it from me. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to Connor and Becky for presenting, and I'll hand back over to Sophie for some Q&A.
Thank you, Tom, and also Becky and Connor for your presentation. Really interesting. Some really stark findings in there, particularly around consumers taking action related to food behaviours to save money in the last month. I've also, just for people who are interested, I've included a link to the report in the Q&A discussion function, so you can follow that directly. And obviously this session has been recorded, so we can share this around after. So we've got a little bit of time now to take any questions. So if anyone's got any more questions for us speakers, please do continue to use the Q&A box. We've had a few questions through already, so I will start with those. I think we've had a couple on methodology, so I'll start with these first. Maybe Connie, you might be the best place to answer these. One was around targeting older people. So someone has asked, do you also target older people as they might be less likely to sign up to online questionnaires? I know you touched on this in the limitations in terms of representation, but if you've got anything else you can add to that.
Yes, so in terms of the specific groups that we'd find hard to recruit, actually older people would not be one of those. Obviously they are slightly less likely to, or they are much less likely to kind of use the internet, and maybe that might be a reason why they might be less likely to do a survey. But overall, we do find it easier to collect responses from people in kind of the 65 plus age group would be usually kind of our highest one. So while we obviously kind of take efforts to recruit all groups, it wouldn't necessarily be that older people would be one that we'd be particularly focused on. It would actually more likely be younger people that we would take kind of more efforts to recruit onto the panel and to get to complete surveys.
Thanks, Connor. That's really clear. Hopefully that's answered your question, Susan. We also had another question from Alice. I think this is more of an internal one, but around how the ad hoc questions are sort of selected for inclusion in the survey. So I don't know, maybe Tom or Becky, if you want to kind of talk about that, and we can also follow up internally.
Yeah, I think it's something we can pick up with you, Alice, offline. Essentially, we do have a form to submit that we can kind of look at your request and triage, and then work with you to develop some questions, hopefully for inclusion.
Great, thanks, Tom. We've also got a question from Deborah asking, have you ever asked if respondents have heard of and have used Olio, which is the waste food sharing app? I think we've also got a reply from Helen actually in the comments directly saying we don't ask about this in the Consumer Insights Tracker, but we do collect this in our Food and U2 survey. So I think that's actually been answered. Okay, and then we've also got a question in here from Gillian. So Gillian has asked, the percentage concerned about food availability seems high. How is this defined? Is there some conflation with affordability?
Yeah, I think I can take this one. I guess we don't know. It's quite possible there could be some conflation with food affordability. We don't provide any definitions in the tracker around what we mean by food availability. We're kind of just looking for people's kind of response to the question, and we aim to kind of word things in a clear English and kind of an easy understandable way. But I guess of course it is quite possible. Be interesting to potentially dig into that a bit more. I guess we're potentially thinking maybe maybe something more qualitative to understand that a bit more, potentially beyond the scope of the tracker. But yeah, really good point, and thanks.
Thank you, Tom. I'm just looking through the chat and I can't see any more questions that have come in. So I'll wrap up. If any other final ones come in, then we can maybe squeeze one more in. But just to flag to everyone, as I mentioned, the seminar is being recorded and it will be available via our YouTube channel, which I've just posted in the chat. So if anybody would like to have a look at any of our previous Food for Thought recordings, you can watch those there, and the Consumer Insights Tracker one will be uploaded in due course. Also, just wanted to flag, if you're not already on the Food for Thought mailing list and you'd like to join, or you'd like any colleagues to join, you can do so via the sign up link, which I've also just popped into the chat. And finally, if you would like to get in touch with us at Food for Thought, you can email us at foodforthought@food.gov.uk. Or if you work at the FSA, you can also search for our page on the intranet. As I mentioned earlier, we do welcome ideas for future speakers. So if you're at the FSA and you'd like to get involved, please let us know. Or alternatively, if you're an external joiner today and you or someone else that you know might be interested at coming to talk to Food for Thought, please do get in touch. I had one more question that's popped in, so maybe we can close on that, which is from Irene. And Irene has asked, do you look at the risk from lookalike food/drink packaging under the food security and food concerns themes?
So yeah, thanks, Irene. It's not something that we currently look at under those themes in the tracker. Not sure whether it's something we cover in Food and U2. So if Helen is around in the background, I'll perhaps leave Helen to write a reply to see if it's covered in Food and U.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Okay, I think that's all the questions and all we have time for today. So I'll leave all those bits in the chat for anyone. If you've got any questions, please get in touch. But just a huge thank you again to all of our speakers and for everyone who's joined today. And I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thanks a lot.